Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Nebula. I've had my fair share of negative videos about Netflix in the past. I've criticized their production methods, their inability to make the kind of long-running shows that are often the most popular things on their platform, and generally how they produce tons of highly serialized, poorly paced shows that end on a cliffhanger never to be resolved. However, I just have to admit when I'm wrong here, because very few of my video titles have aged quite as poorly as The Fall of Netflix from 2020. So that's what I'm going to dig into here. Oh, and I will say I'm recording on a borrowed mic setup this week, so if my audio is a little off, that's why. Anyway, back then I was convinced the streamer was on wildly shaky ground, losing some of their most watched shows like Friends and The Office, deep in debt, and producing tons of originals, most of which failed to break through at all. And while the hit that Netflix took from losing so many shows and movies to upstart streamers like Max, Peacock, and Paramount Plus was substantial, and there was plenty of grumbling, one thing I just really failed to account for is how fanatically committed to the service that many of its users were. As I've talked about before, the mass migration to Peacock that NBC Universal expected Office fans to take after pulling the show from Netflix kind of failed to materialize. And though your average Netflix production may be a buried one-season show that barely anyone talks about after release, there was just so much of it that some stuff really did break through. Some genuine mega hits like Wednesday, niche favorites like I Think You Should Leave, and an increasingly strong animated lineup like Arcane and the recent Blue Eye Samurai. Netflix may not be my streaming service of choice most of the time, but they managed to weather the storm and keep a lot of their viewers. And even the much complained about practice of cracking down on password sharing didn't scare people away. That, combined with the lower price ad tier, actually worked. People got over it and signed up, giving their numbers a boost in countries where they had previously slowed way down. Netflix went through some very rocky years, but have seemingly turned a corner, with all the other major mega streamers now having to acknowledge its place at the top of the heap, resigned to jockeying for a distant second place. Why do I feel like that's happening? Well, if you take a look at least the American Netflix homepage right now, one of the things you're likely to see near the top is Steven Spielberg's 2001 miniseries Band of Brothers. And even though I read the news a while ago that this was happening, when I actually saw it, for a moment there, I was shocked. Is that overdramatic? Maybe, but look, there are few shows I associate more with the HBO brand. Band of Brothers was an important part of that late 90s, early 2000s wave of shows that helped establish a new identity for HBO, one associated with the highest quality prestige TV. And they did the same with Netflix for 6 Feet Under. A year or two ago, the idea of Warner Brothers licensing these out to Netflix instead of insisting that they remain on HBO Max, the streaming service that WB really bet the farm on, would have been unthinkable. In 2023 though, the landscape has completely changed. The audience is on Netflix, and if these shows and films can command a really high price, more and more giant studios are willing to kneecap their own services a little bit. Now, if this was just WB and Max, that'd be one thing. It could easily be chalked up to another controversial move from CEO David Zaslav. But the thing is, he's far from alone in this. I'm sure many families have watched the Super Mario Bros. Movie on Netflix during this holiday break, which just a few months ago was serving as the main enticement behind getting people to sign up for Peacock. And Disney is even following suit. Sure, with shows that aren't super associated with Disney as a brand to your average person, like you won't find Elsa, Ariel, or Mickey Mouse on there, or things like Star Wars and the Avengers, but you will find that a lot of the biggest heavy hitters in their TV catalog are coming to Netflix soon, from Lost and Archer to How I Met Your Mother and ESPN's 30 for 30. Considering that, at least in the US, Hulu getting folded into Disney Plus is a pretty big deal for the streamer, you'd think that these are some of the titles they'd want to hold back to make sure that that feels like it's adding more value, especially for a show like How I Met Your Mother, these long sitcoms that people tend to watch and rewatch, something that's extremely valuable to these services. But even Disney apparently needs to go for this easy, short-term money right now, and I think that says a lot. That's not to say that no deals of this kind happened in the last few years, but they're becoming increasingly notable and visible. And I'm very interested to see if that trend continues, or if the big studios will be able to salvage their original streaming plans. Because if it does, I think we'll start to see a very different Netflix, or maybe even something that resembles what its streaming service was in those early years. I mean, really, do you remember the original Netflix instant? You didn't have all the originals you have today, obviously, but nearly every big studio seemed happy to make their stuff available. There was a reason Netflix Instant caught on so quickly. That 2007-2008 price, and especially the selection, were just incredible. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly nostalgic for the streaming quality, but otherwise, it was really unbeatable. And while I definitely don't want to see Netflix with unquestioned control over home distribution, I just don't think one company having that much power would ever be a good thing, it is hard to deny that, especially now when money is tight for a lot of people, that the shows and movies your average person wants to see being split up among an ever-ballooning number of services from the biggest studios was just not what most people wanted. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, Netflix had an impressive catalog because the big studios undervalued streaming. They didn't seem to anticipate how rapidly it would just eat linear TV's lunch, really leaving, with a couple exceptions, only live sports for that market to get by on. So now, Netflix might once again end up with a really impressive library, but for the exact opposite reason, that they're the biggest game in town. For millions of people, watching TV has become synonymous with watching Netflix. Even when Netflix's library was taking hit after hit as major studios moved titles away from them, most people stuck around. Studios thought that they could significantly cut into Netflix's market share, and while they weren't totally unsuccessful, like Disney Plus certainly has a ton of subscribers, they didn't really achieve that. Netflix retained their top spot and are now better positioned than anyone else. That means that the programming strategies seem to slowly but surely be shifting. If you're producing a TV show, especially an expensive one, Netflix is really the elephant in the room, because the odds of your show actually taking off and really getting on the radar there just far outpace the chances of it getting noticed anywhere else. That's not to say that this never happens elsewhere, like Ted Lasso got a ton of buzz despite being on Apple TV, but it just doesn't seem to transfer to other shows on the platform in a way that I'm sure they'd really hope. I do think Apple Plus has some strong stuff, but Ted Lasso did not help, say, For All Mankind or the recent Slow Horses break out into the mainstream. And I'm fairly confident that both of those shows would be really well liked by a mass audience had they been on Netflix. I think what this might mean in the long run is that if these services are going to stick around, they'll have to play by Netflix's rules to get the eyeballs they need. Take Peacock's Poker Face. I really enjoyed this one. It was a fun series of whodunits in the style of Columbo. I assume it did well by Peacock standards, but the issue is, well, it was on Peacock. One of the show's creators, Rian Johnson, is a pretty big deal on Netflix. Glass Onion was a big release for them, and Knives Out is often in the top 10. Being able to connect Poker Face to Netflix viewers who watch both of those movies would have been a really big deal for that show, not to mention the fact that its star, Natasha Lyonne, really put herself on the map with a pair of Netflix projects, Orange is the New Black and Russian Doll. Poker Face was kind of the perfect show for them. So maybe NBC Universal could have used the platform to their advantage, premiering the show on Netflix and then asking people to sign up for Peacock for the back half of the season or even season 2. I think we'll start seeing more moves like that as major studios attempt to give their shows every chance they can to succeed. And if that doesn't work, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these major services quietly go away. A lot of leeway was given to like Peacock and Paramount Plus in those early years, but as time goes on, it just becomes more and more clear how poor of replacements they are for the massive juggernauts that were NBC and CBS for decades. Something eventually has to give, whether it's bundling all these services up to try to compete with Netflix once more, or accept that it may be better to make their own stuff to distribute to Netflix or the uncrushable Amazon instead of trying to hold on to their own distribution channels. I really don't know. But the future increasingly doesn't look like a Paramount Plus, Peacock, or even Max could ever blow up to the size of Netflix and maintain it the way that Netflix has. That was the hope when these services launch, even if Peacock tries to downplay it now. But Netflix's head start and built-in loyalty is just looking like it may have been too much to overcome. And after 5 years of astronomical spending on these struggling services, it may be time for some very large Hollywood studios to reckon with the fact that they missed the boat early on, and may have to figure out where they fit into an entertainment landscape that so rapidly shifted under their feet. Well, it's that time of year. Hot cocoa, mistletoe, chestnuts, the whole 9 yards. And if you're even vaguely in the holiday spirit, or honestly just want to hear someone talk about Star Wars for a long time, then I have the video for you. The Patrick H. Willems Holiday Special on Nebula. Here we get to watch Patrick tackle the galaxy far, far away from a ton of different angles and break down where he stands on this franchise after so many years. It's just a lot of fun. I have the link below, please check it out. But of course, that's not all that's on my streaming service, Nebula. I have some originals on there as well, and my videos there are always ad-free. Plus, there's great creators like Lindsay Ellis uploading exclusive videos, along with Polyphonic, Windover Productions, Be Kind Rewind, and hit series like Jetlag. So if you sign up using the link below, you can support me directly and get both Nebula and Nebula classes for 40% off an annual plan. Basically, just over $250 a month. It's an incredible deal on a service that just continues to impress. So please check it out in the pinned comment or description below.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.